I remember the day I truly understood what it meant to learn from an enemy. It wasn't in any tournament ring or movie set. It wasn't even in a fight. It was in a small restaurant in Oakland, 1967, sitting across from a man who had spent months trying to destroy everything I had built. His name was Wong Jack Man, and he had just challenged me to a fight that would either validate my teaching methods or end my career in America forever. But here's what nobody knew about that day, what I never told the reporters or the biographers. As I sat there, listening to his words, watching his eyes, studying his posture, I realized something profound. This man, my greatest critic, my harshest opponent, was about to teach me more about myself than every supportive student, every encouraging friend, every positive review ever could. In that moment of pure opposition, pure conflict, I discovered a truth that would reshape not just my martial arts, but my entire approach to life. A wise man can learn more from enemies than a fool from friends. These aren't just words. They're a blueprint for transformation, a roadmap to wisdom that most people never discover because they spend their entire lives running from opposition instead of embracing it. You feel it right now, don't you? That resistance in your chest when I mention embracing your enemies. That voice in your head saying, "But Bruce, my enemies want to hurt me. They want to see me fail." And you're absolutely right, but that's exactly why they're more valuable than any friend could ever be. Your enemies show you your weaknesses with surgical precision. Your friends, even the best ones, often hide these truths behind kindness and comfort. Let me take you back to that restaurant, to that moment when everything I thought I knew about learning was turned upside down. Wong Jack Man wasn't just challenging my fighting ability. He was challenging my right to teach non-Chinese students, my methods, my very existence in America. Every word he spoke was designed to cut deep, to find my insecurities and exploit them. And you know what? He succeeded. Sitting there, I felt every doubt I had ever pushed aside come rushing back. Was I good enough? Was I qualified? Was I dishonoring my traditions? But then something shifted. Instead of defending myself, instead of attacking back, I started listening differently. I started hearing not just his words, but the fears behind them, the traditions he was desperately trying to protect, the changes he was terrified of accepting. And in understanding his position, I began to understand my own more clearly than ever before. This is the first lesson your enemies teach you that friends cannot. They force you to examine your foundations. When someone who truly opposes you challenges your beliefs, your methods, your very identity, you cannot rely on surface-level confidence. You must dig deep. You must ask yourself the hard questions. Is what I believe really true? Are my methods really effective? Am I living authentically? Or am I just performing a role? Your friends, bless them, they love you too much to put you through this kind of examination. They see you struggling and want to comfort you. They see you doubting and want to reassure you. They will strip away every comfortable illusion, every false assumption, every piece of borrowed confidence until you're left with nothing but the raw truth of who you are and what you're really capable of. I fought Wong Jack Man that day, and I won. But the real victory wasn't in the physical confrontation. The real victory was in what he forced me to discover about myself in the weeks leading up to that fight. Every criticism he had made, every doubt he had planted, became a point of investigation. I didn't just train my body harder. I examined every technique, every principle, every belief I held about martial arts and about myself. Your enemies are your unpaid consultants. Think about it. They study your weaknesses more intensely than you do. They analyze your failures more thoroughly than you do. They see your blind spots more clearly than you do. And they deliver this analysis with complete honesty, without the sugar coating that friends often provide. The question isn't whether their observations are delivered with malice. The question is whether their observations are accurate. I remember another enemy from my early days in Hollywood. A director who told me I would never make it in American films because my accent was too thick, my fighting style too foreign, my whole presence too oriental for Western audiences. His words cut deep because they voiced every fear I had about my place in this new world. But instead of dismissing him as a racist, instead of writing him off as ignorant, I asked myself a different question. What if he's partially right? Not about my potential, but about the challenges I need to overcome. That conversation led me to work harder on my English, to study American culture more deeply, to understand not just how to fight on screen, but how to communicate my philosophy to Western minds. My enemy had identified real obstacles, real challenges that I needed to face. My friends had been too polite, too encouraging to point out these difficult truths. This brings me to the second profound lesson enemies teach us. They show us where we are being complacent. Friends often enable our comfort zones. They don't want to upset us, don't want to push us beyond what feels safe. But enemies, they delight in making us uncomfortable. They push us into territories we would never willingly explore. Every time someone told me I couldn't do something, that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong, they were inadvertently mapping out my next area of growth. When traditional martial artists said I was betraying ancient wisdom, they forced me to develop a deeper, more authentic understanding of that wisdom. When Hollywood executives said I couldn't be a leading man, they pushed me to prove not just that I could act, but that I could redefine what a leading man could be. Your enemies don't just identify your weaknesses, they identify your unexplored potential. The very things they say you cannot do often become the things you must do to grow into your full power. But here's the crucial point. This only works if you approach opposition with the right mindset. Most people approach enemies with pure defensiveness. Pure defensiveness. They hear criticism and immediately build walls. They encounter opposition and immediately go into battle mode. But what if there's another way? What if you could learn to approach your enemies like a scientist approaches a laboratory? What if you could study opposition with curiosity instead of anger? I developed what I call the mirror principle. When someone opposes you, attacks you, criticizes you, imagine they are holding up a mirror. Not a mirror that shows you how you look, but a mirror that shows you how you appear to others, how your actions affect the world, where your blind spots might be hiding. Sometimes the mirror is distorted by their own fears and prejudices, but often embedded in their opposition are truths you need to hear. Let me tell you about one of my most unexpected teachers, a film critic who wrote scathing reviews of my early movies. He called my fighting unrealistic, my acting wooden, my philosophy pretentious. Reading his reviews was like being punched in the stomach. But instead of dismissing him, I studied his criticism carefully. Which parts stung because they were unfair? And which parts stung because they were true? He was right about some things. My early performances were sometimes stiff because I was more focused on looking perfect than on being authentic. My fighting scenes sometimes prioritized flash over substance. His criticism, harsh as it was, pushed me to develop more nuanced acting skills to bring more emotional depth to my physical performances. Years later, after Enter the Dragon, that same critic wrote a review calling my final performance a masterpiece of physical and emotional expression. But I never forgot that his earlier criticism had been part of the journey. My enemy had become my teacher without either of us fully realizing it. This is the third lesson, enemies. Teach us that friends cannot. They accelerate our development. Friends often accept us as we are, which is beautiful and necessary for our emotional well-being. But enemies refuse to accept us as we are. They demand that we become better, stronger, more authentic. They won't let us hide behind our current limitations. Think about the last time a friend pointed out a significant flaw in your character or approach. Can you even remember such a time? Now think about the last time an enemy or critic did the same thing. Probably much more recent, probably much more specific, probably much more uncomfortable. Your friends love you enough to accept your flaws. Your enemies challenge you enough to help you overcome them. But here's where most people get lost. They think learning from enemies means agreeing with enemies. They think it means letting people walk all over them, or accepting unfair treat me wrong. Learning from enemies doesn't mean surrendering to them. It means extracting value from their opposition while maintaining your own center, your own truth, your own power. When I studied my enemies, I wasn't trying to please them or prove them wrong. I was mining their perspectives for useful information. Like a prospector panning for gold, I would sift through their criticism, their attacks, their opposition, looking for nuggets of truth that could help me grow. The dirt and rocks I would discard, but the gold I would keep. This requires a kind of emotional discipline that most people never develop. It requires the ability to separate the message from the messenger, the useful insight from the malicious intent. It requires what I call combat consciousness, the ability to remain centered and analytical even under attack. Let me teach you how to develop this consciousness. When someone opposes you, criticizes you, attacks your ideas or your character, your first instinct will be to defend or attack back. This is natural, but it's also limiting. Instead, try this. Take a deep breath and ask yourself 3 questions. First, what specifically are they saying about my actions, my methods, my results? Strip away the emotion, the insults, the personal attacks, and identify the core claims they're making about your performance or approach. Second, where might they have a point? Not where they're completely right, but where their perspective might reveal something you hadn't considered. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. Even your worst enemy might see something you've missed. Third, what does their opposition reveal about their own fears, limitations, or blind spots? Understanding why someone opposes you often teaches you as much about human nature as understanding what they oppose teaches you about yourself. I applied this process constantly throughout my career. When traditional martial artists attacked my methods, I learned about both the strengths and limitations of traditional thinking. When movie executives dismissed my potential, I learned about both the entertainment industry's narrow vision and my own need to develop broader skills. When other actors saw me as competition to be eliminated, I learned about both professional insecurity and my own responsibility to lift others up rather than just climbing over them. The fourth lesson enemies teach us is perhaps the most profound. They reveal our true character. Friends see us at our best when we're comfortable and confident, but enemies see us under pressure when we're challenged and tested. How you respond to opposition tells you more about who you really are than how you respond to support ever could. I remember a particular incident early in my Hollywood career. A stuntman, jealous of the attention I was receiving, spread rumors about me being difficult to work with, unprofessional, dangerous on set. These rumors reached several directors and could have ended my career before it really began. I had a choice: respond with anger and defensiveness, or respond with something else entirely. I chose to respond by working even harder to be the most professional, most collaborative, most safety-conscious performer on every set. I let my actions speak louder than any words could. But more importantly, this enemy's attack forced me to examine my own behavior honestly. Was I sometimes impatient? Yes. Was I sometimes so focused on perfection that I forgot about the team around me? Yes. Within 6 months, directors who had heard the rumors were specifically requesting me for projects because of my professionalism. My enemy's attack had inadvertently helped me develop qualities that advanced my career far more than simple talent alone could have. This is the paradox of learning from enemies. They often help you achieve the very success they're trying to prevent. By forcing you to address your weaknesses, by pushing you to develop new strengths, by making you prove yourself over and over again, they contribute to your growth in ways they never intended. But let me be clear about something crucial. Learning from enemies is not the same as seeking out enemies or creating necessary conflict. You don't need to go looking for opposition. Life provides plenty of it naturally. The key is to change your relationship with the opposition, that your life. Instead of seeing critics as obstacles to overcome, see them as information to process. Instead of seeing competitors as threats to eliminate, see them as benchmarks to surpass. Instead of seeing opposition as something to endure, see it as something to utilize. This shift in perspective changes everything. When you stop fighting against opposition and start learning from it, you transform every enemy into a teacher, every criticism into a lesson, every challenge into an opportunity for growth. The fifth lesson enemies teach us is about resilience. Enemies teach us is about resilience. Friends cushion your falls, which is wonderful for emotional healing, but not always optimal for building strength. Enemies knock you down and expect you to get up on your own. This forced self-reliance develops a kind of inner strength that cannot be built any other way. Every time someone told me I would fail, every time someone tried to sabotage my progress, every time someone wrote me off as a novelty or a fluke, I had to dig deeper into my own resources. I had to find strength I didn't know I had, develop skills I hadn't thought I needed, Discover reserves of determination that surprised even me. Your friends will carry you when you're weak. Your enemies will force you to become strong enough to carry yourself. Both are valuable, but only one creates lasting inner power. I want to share with you now a practice that transformed how I dealt with opposition throughout my life. I call it the enemy audit. Once a month, I would sit down and honestly assess who was opposing me and why. Not to plan revenge or to fuel resentment, but to extract maximum learning from each source of opposition. For each person or group opposing me, I would write down 3 things: what they were specifically criticizing about my approach, what they might be afraid of in my success, and what their opposition was, revealing about areas where I could improve. This process turned every enemy into a consultant, every attack into a diagnostic tool. Try this practice yourself. Think about the people in your life who challenge you, criticize you, or oppose your goals. Instead of just feeling frustrated by them, study them. What patterns do you notice in their criticisms? What weaknesses do they consistently identify? What do their attacks reveal about your blind spots? You'll probably discover that your enemies know you better than you think. They've been studying you, analyzing you, looking for ways to challenge you. Why not benefit from all that research? Why not use their observations to accelerate your own development? The 6th lesson enemies teach us is about authenticity. Friends often accept whatever version of yourself you present to them. They're invested in maintaining harmony, in keeping relationships comfortable. But enemies have no such investment. They will call out inconsistencies, challenge pretenses, and force you to defend or abandon positions that aren't genuinely yours. This process, uncomfortable as it is, helps you discover what you truly believe versus what you think you should believe. It helps you identify which of your convictions are real and which are borrowed. It strips away the performances and reveals the authentic person underneath. When martial arts traditionalists attacked my innovations, they forced me to articulate exactly why I believed change was necessary. I couldn't just say, because it feels right, or because it's modern. I had to develop a deep, logical, philosophical foundation for my approach. Their opposition made my authentic beliefs stronger by forcing me to defend them with more than just instinct. When Hollywood executives questioned my leading man potential, they forced me to define for myself what kind of performer I really wanted to be. Not what was safe or commercially viable, but what was authentic to my vision. Their resistance helped me clarify my artistic identity in ways that encouragement alone never could have. Your enemies won't let you hide behind false personas or borrowed beliefs. They demand that you show up as your real self, with real convictions, real strength, real authenticity. This is terrifying, but ultimately liberating. Now let me address the question I know you're thinking. How do you learn from enemies without becoming bitter, without losing your compassion, without turning into the very thing you oppose? This is perhaps the most important aspect of this entire philosophy. The secret is to maintain what I call warrior compassion. You recognize that your enemies are usually not evil people, just people operating from fear, insecurity, or limited understanding. Their opposition often says more about their own struggles than about your worth. When you understand this, you can extract the valuable lessons from their challenges without absorbing their negativity. I learned to see my enemies as unconscious teachers. They didn't intend to help me grow, but their opposition forced growth anyway. This perspective allowed me to feel grateful for the lessons while maintaining boundaries against the malice. There's a difference between learning from someone and accepting their treatment of you. You can extract wisdom from criticism without tolerating abuse. You can grow from opposition without becoming a victim. You can appreciate the lessons without embracing the messenger. This brings me to the seventh and perhaps most powerful lesson enemies teach us. They show us our true purpose. Friends support whatever goals we set for ourselves, but enemies force us to dig deeper. They make us ask not just what we want to achieve, but why it matters, why it's worth defending, why it's worth the struggle, why it's worth the struggle. When people opposed my teaching methods, when they said I was corrupting martial arts traditions, I had to examine my deeper motivations. Was I just trying to be different for the sake of being different? Or was I responding to a genuine need for evolution in martial arts and martial arts? Their opposition forced me to connect with my true purpose. Not just to fight well, but to free martial arts from the limitations that kept them from reaching their full potential. When others in Hollywood tried to typecast me as a novelty act, when they said audiences would never accept an Asian leading man, I had to clarify my deeper mission. Was I just trying to become famous, or was I trying to break down barriers that limited not just me, but everyone who came after me? Their resistance helped me understand that my true purpose wasn't personal success, but cultural transformation. Your enemies will force you to defend your dreams, your goals, your mission. In that process of defense, you'll discover which of your pursuits are truly meaningful and which are just ego-driven desires. You'll separate your authentic purpose from your superficial wants. The eighth lesson is about timing and patience. It's about timing and patience. Friends often encourage you to move at a comfortable pace, to take your time, to not rush. But enemies create urgency. They won't wait for you to be ready. They won't give you time to prepare perfectly. They force you to act, to decide, to commit before you feel completely prepared. This urgency, this pressure, teaches you to trust your instincts and abilities in ways that comfort never could. When you're forced to perform under opposition, you discover capabilities you didn't know you had. You learn to improvise, to adapt, to find solutions in real time rather than in theoretical planning sessions. Every major breakthrough in my career happened under pressure from enemies or critics. The development of Gyat Kun Do came from the pressure of traditional martial artists who said my methods were inadequate. My entry into Hollywood came from the pressure of American martial arts instructors who said I would never succeed outside the Chinese community. My evolution as an actor came from critics who said I was just a fighter pretending to be an artist. Without that pressure, without that opposition, I might have remained comfortable with lesser versions of myself. My enemies refused to let me settle for mediocrity. Let me share with you now a practice that will help you implement everything I've been teaching. I call it the opposition transformation technique. When you encounter criticism, opposition, or attack, instead of immediately defending or counterattacking, pause and ask yourself, what is this situation trying to teach me? Sometimes the lesson is about a skill you need to develop. Sometimes it's about a weakness you need to address. Sometimes it's about a blind spot you need to acknowledge. Sometimes it's about a purpose you need to clarify. Sometimes it's about an authenticity you need to embrace. But there's always a lesson if you're willing to look for it. The question isn't whether the person opposing you has good intentions. The question is whether their opposition contains useful information. Practice this with small oppositions first. When someone criticizes your work, when someone questions your methods, when someone challenges your ideas, resist the urge to immediately defend yourself. Instead, explore their perspective. What might they be seeing that you're missing? What might their opposition reveal about areas for growth? As you develop this skill with minor oppositions, you'll find yourself better equipped to handle major ones. You'll discover that you can remain centered and analytical, even under significant attack. You'll learn to mine wisdom from the most unlikely sources. The 9th lesson enemies teach us is about innovation. Friends often encourage you to stick with what works, what's safe, what's proven. But enemies challenge your current methods so directly that they force you to innovate, to find new approaches, to break new ground. Every innovation in my martial arts came from someone challenging the adequacy of my current methods. When boxers said my punches weren't fast enough, I developed new training methods that increased hand speed beyond what traditional techniques could achieve. Not malicious personal attacks, but intelligent, well-informed criticism. Such opposition accelerates development in ways that encouragement alone never could. The 10th and final lesson is perhaps the most profound. Enemies teach us about our own capacity for transformation. E for transformation. Friends love us as we are, which is beautiful, but sometimes limiting. They're invested in maintaining the version of you they know and care about. But enemies have no such investment. This identity challenge, painful as it is, creates space for growth that wouldn't otherwise exist. When someone says you're not the kind of person who could ever achieve that, they're inadvertently giving you permission to become a different kind of person. When someone says people like you don't belong in this arena, they're challenging you to redefine what people like you are capable of. Every major transformation in my life came from someone telling me what I couldn't do, couldn't be, couldn't achieve. These limitations, meant to constrain me, became launching points for transcendence. But here's the crucial point about transformation through opposition. It only works if you maintain your core values while evolving your capabilities. You don't become a different person to spite your enemies. You become a more complete version of yourself by refusing to accept their limitations. When martial arts traditionalists said I was betraying Chinese culture, I didn't abandon my respect for tradition. I developed a deeper understanding of what was truly valuable in tradition versus what was merely habitual. When Hollywood executives said I needed to be less Chinese to succeed in America, I didn't try to become something I wasn't. I found ways to express my authentic self in language and methods that broader audiences could appreciate. The transformation that comes from enemy pressure isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself than you thought possible. Now, as we near the end of our journey together, I want to leave you with a challenge, a way to begin implementing this wisdom immediately. For the next 30 days, I want you to practice what I call enemy appreciation. This doesn't mean you have to like your enemies or invite them for dinner. It means you approach every criticism, every opposition, every challenge with one simple question. What can this teach me? When someone cuts you off in traffic, instead of just feeling angry, ask what this might teach you about patience or defensive driving. When a colleague criticizes your work, instead of just feeling defensive, ask what this might reveal about communication or skill development. When a competitor seems to be gaining ground on you, instead of just feeling threatened, ask what this might teach you about innovation or effort. Start small, start simple, but start. Begin to see opposition as information rather than attack. Begin to see criticism as data rather than insult. Begin to see enemies as unconscious consultants rather than threats to be eliminated. As you develop this perspective, you'll notice something remarkable happening. You'll become less defensive and more curious. You'll become less reactive and more responsive. You'll become less threatened by opposition and more energized by it. A wise man can learn more from enemies than a fool from friends, because wisdom requires discomfort, challenge, and the courage to face unpleasant truths. Friends, in their kindness, often shield us from these necessary difficulties. Enemies, in their opposition, deliver them with surgical precision.